freaking window! Close the window!
Stop scrolling. If you've been wondering why you can't afford a house right now, you need to see what the Federal Reserve just quietly admitted. It changes everything.
Maybe anywhere. It's all about the interest rate. Lower the interest rates, you can have all the housing you want. But you have to understand, I don't want to hurt people that own houses too. These people, for the first time in their lives, they have valuable houses. They become rich. I don't want to hurt them either.
Wait, did you catch that? He is pointing directly at the core of the problem, but there is a massive underlying layer that nobody wants to openly discuss until right now. Everyone blames standard inflation or supply chain issues for the housing market completely locking up. But a brand new paper from the Dallas Federal Reserve just leaked into the mainstream, and it completely shifts the narrative away from standard interest rate complaints. We are talking about a totally artificial demand shock that was injected straight into our real estate market. The experts on TV have been completely missing this. When you have millions of new individuals entering the system who all need a place to sleep, the available inventory evaporates overnight. The basic laws of supply and demand kick in, and standard families get priced out of their own neighborhoods. But stick with me, because how this was actually funded behind the scenes is going to absolutely blow your mind.
Just imagine coming to this country with nothing, and all of a sudden you're illegal, and you got your mortgages guaranteed, you got the down payment, you take the risk, and this nonsense that they're going to pay them back. How are you going to pay someone back if you're not working? I mean, come on. It should have ended long ago, but these are the kinds of things that the Biden and Harris administration did in the dark that's finally coming to light.
Look at the absolute shock on the analyst's face right there. That is the exact reaction every taxpayer should be having today. Imagine saving up for years, carefully building your credit score, skipping vacations to scrounge together a 20% down payment, only to find out you are being outbid. And you aren't just being outbid, you are being outbid by temporary residents who were handed taxpayer-backed FHA loans. These are government-guaranteed mortgages that the average citizen has to jump through a million fiery hoops to secure. The fact that the Department of Housing and Urban Development actually had to step in and explicitly terminate this program tells you exactly how out of control the system got. This wasn't a glitch. It was a quiet policy that completely cannibalized the starter home inventory across the country. It is basic economics playing out in real time, and the middle class was forced to foot the bill while simultaneously losing the bidding wars. I really need you to focus on the math sitting right in front of you. This isn't some random talking head on a podcast making wild claims. This is the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas putting it in black and white. For every single 1% increase in unauthorized immigrant workers in a local labor market, home prices spiked by 2.2%. That is a massive, disproportionate multiplier effect on the local economy. Let that really sink in for a second. If a city saw a 10% influx, they were suddenly dealing with a 22% artificial hyperinflation on their real estate values. And rent jumped almost 1.5% for that same 1% metric. This completely shatters the illusion that housing prices just magically floated upwards because of remote work or pandemic savings. It was a direct mathematical consequence of unprecedented population surges in highly concentrated areas. Just look at the headline right there. The cat is finally out of the bag on a national level. When major business networks start confirming that unauthorized surges triggered a 30% rise in home prices and a 20% spike in rent, the narrative is officially shifting. For years, anybody who tried to connect these two dots was immediately shut down or told they didn't understand macroeconomics. But the data doesn't care about political correctness. It only cares about the rigid laws of supply. We are dealing with an incredibly rigid, slow-moving construction sector that takes years to build new neighborhoods. You simply cannot drop millions of new renters into that static environment without causing a total pricing explosion. The folks who already owned homes got incredibly rich on paper, while an entire generation of first-time buyers got completely financially exiled. Pay close attention to how fast this specific data is currently spreading across social platforms. When you have major news aggregators blasting out the reality that 30% of home price growth in average metro areas is directly linked to this single issue, it validates what working-class families have been feeling for 3 years. It's the ultimate validation of your own wallet. People aren't crazy for thinking the deck was fundamentally stacked against them recently. You've been competing in a rigged game where the rules were changed mid-play without your consent. This isn't just a political debate anymore. It is a profound financial autopsy of the American dream. The real question now is whether the upcoming policy changes and aggressive border enforcement will actually create a deflationary event in these specific, hyper-inflated zip codes. We might be on the edge of a massive market correction.
Paper, it's called The Impacts of Unauthorized Immigration on U.S. Labor and Housing Markets by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. It's a mouthful. It's usually boring, this kind of stuff.
You have to respect the raw administrative microdata being utilized right here. The economists literally tracked court records, parole data, and local labor metrics to prove this correlation. They isolated the variable perfectly. By stripping away standard post-pandemic market behaviors, they found the absolute smoking gun of our current affordability crisis. It is incredibly rare for a Federal Reserve working paper to slice through the political noise this sharply and point the finger at a specific administration's policy failure. But the numbers became too mathematically overwhelming to ignore or sweep under the rug. When 7 million new individuals enter an already depleted housing ecosystem within a 36-month window, the structural integrity of the market simply snaps. This document is going to be studied in university economic classes for the next 50 years. Check out the sheer vertical climb on this graph. That line right there represents the destruction of middle-class purchasing power. Look at how relatively stable and predictable the historical growth was right up until that massive unnatural spike. The government tried to tell you that was just the cost of doing business during a global health crisis, but the timeline tells the real story. That explosion in median sales prices perfectly mirrors the exact timeline of the demographic surge we just unpacked. It is a visual representation of systemic policy failure. If you were sitting on the sidelines waiting for a dip during that run-up, your savings literally evaporated in real purchasing power. The damage is permanently baked into the chart, and reversing a vertical climb like that is going to take incredibly drastic economic measures.
มันประชัดอะ
มันขี้ตกใจกันอยู่แล้วไง
ฝรั่งใช่เด็กฝรั่งแล้วมีตำรวจอยู่ไปต้องเป็นกระจกหนึ่งเลยนะไม่น่าจะมีอะไรนะ
Notice the sheer panic in the streets right here. This kind of civic instability is exactly what bubbles to the surface when the cost of living completely outpaces human survival capabilities. We aren't just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. We are talking about the breakdown of societal cohesion in major metropolitan areas. When rent becomes mathematically impossible to pay on a standard local wage, the streets reflect that desperation immediately. The current massive shift toward reverse migration is the ultimate indicator that the experiment failed. People are fleeing these high-density sanctuary zones because the economic reality is too punishing to endure. It is going to be absolutely fascinating and likely quite painful to see what happens to the property values in these exact areas when the artificial demand completely dries up and the mass exodus accelerates. Drop a comment below. Has your rent dropped yet, or are you still feeling the squeeze? Hit subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.